Hey everybody, it's Clayton here, and today what I'm going to be going over with you is how to set up a perspective grid guide in Photoshop fast and easily. Now the first thing we're going to have to do is we're going to need to lay down a horizon line. Now this is basically going to be the eye level of the viewer in the scene. Okay, so let's lay this down here. And for this particular exercise, I'm going to have my horizon line a little bit higher up in the canvas. Okay, so we're going to set our eye level to be about here. Now, what this basically means is that the viewer, when they look upon our landscape or environment or whatever it is that we're trying to convey here, they're actually going to be situated a little bit higher up in the scene, looking down onto whatever we're trying to show them. Okay, so let's talk about how we're going to create both the vanishing points and the perspective guidelines themselves. Now this is where this particular technique makes things super easy. The next step I'm going to take is I'm going to go down here to the shape tool, and I'm going to click and hold down this button and go down to my polygon tool, like so. Now the magic happens when we change some of the details and functions up here in the top menu of settings that we've got in the Photoshop interface. Now the first thing I need to check is the stroke. Now I'm going to change the stroke to be, we'll make it say a blue, like so. Actually, let's make that a little bit lighter. Great. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the line up here to be a straight line, and I'm going to change the size a little bit as well. Next, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over here to this little cog icon, and I'm going to ensure that star is checked on. Okay, this is super important, and you'll see why in a moment. Next, we need to indent the sides by 99%. Okay, so just make sure that here in indent sides, you've got 99% placed in there. This is also very important. What this is going to do is it's going to increase the amount of sides that the default polygon tool has, and then it's going to indent the sides by 99%, meaning that it's going to push them into the center. And you'll basically see the effects of exactly what that does in just a moment. Now what we're going to do is we're going to increase the sides. Now by default, I think the polygon tool has about 5 sides. You just want to make sure that you pump that right up to about 100. All right. Once that's done, what you'll notice is that when we draw out into the canvas, we end up getting this star shape here. Now that's a little bit light, so we're just going to change things up a bit for a moment. Let's make it a nice bright red so it's a lot easier to see. Hit enter. Now that's actually very faded, so maybe we should just pump these lines up a bit, see what happens. Oh great, okay, cool. Alright, so we'll pull this out, and again that's very thin, and the reason as to why it's very kind of hard to see is because we just need to pump these lines up a little bit. I'm going to leave it at about 10. I think 10's pretty good for this. Alright, so 10, hit enter, and as you can see, what we've created is basically our vanishing point and our perspective guidelines in one fell swoop. All right. Now the only thing we have to decide on is exactly where those vanishing points are going to be placed along the horizon line. Now personally, I like to place these a little further apart. In fact, sometimes I even like to place my vanishing points right off of the canvas altogether. And the reason for that is to avoid any weird kind of distortion within the image. You know, to kind of get away from that fisheye lens effect that, you know, can often happen when vanishing points are placed way too close together. So let's zoom out here a little bit, like so. And I'm going to place one vanishing point over here. And I'm going to estimate roughly whereabouts the horizon line would be if it was to extend off of the canvas. So I'm going to place one here. Whoa. Let's make sure that we've got our shape tool selected. I'm just going to pull out a vanishing point right here, like so, and hit enter. Now we do need to increase the size of our stroke, of course. And again, I'm going to leave it at about a 10. We'll just move this in a bit so that those lines stretch from one side of the canvas to the other. Okay? So again, if we were to kind of move our vanishing point onto the canvas here, it'd, ideally be sitting on the horizon line. So we'll just move it off again. Next, what we need to do is we need to create the second vanishing point if we do intend to indeed create a 2-point perspective setup. Now, of course, I'm going to show you guys exactly how to do a 3-point perspective setup as well while I'm at it, but let's just stick with the 2 points for now. Now, we've got two options here. What we could do is we could simply clone the shape or the polygon tool that we've just created, okay, by obviously going down here in our layers panel and just taking it down to the new layer icon. That would in fact create a brand new vanishing point for us. Or we could simply just draw another one right onto the horizon line. But for now, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to clone the one I just created just to save time, and I'm just going to move it across to the other side. And you'll see that as I do so, what happens is that we end up getting a grid that appears as the perspective grid guidelines overlap one another. Now this is exactly what we're looking for here. So I'm just going to go ahead and place that into the ideal position that I'd like it to be in. Now every now and then you may have one vanishing point that is actually on the canvas like so. Yeah, and it really just depends on, the things that you want to convey in your scene and how you want to set up the camera. Again, personally, most of the time my vanishing points are just placed right off of the canvas altogether to avoid any of that distortion. But for this example, let's just leave it on there so we can see how these are actually placed on the horizon line. All right, next we'll add in a third vanishing point just to complete the grid here. Now you can think of these as kind of like axes, right? You've got your y-axis over here, you've got your x-axis over here, and of course we're going to create the z-axis. And this will basically create literally a three-dimensional grid for us to draw on. So let's go ahead and clone these one more time. And I'll move this top one up over here. Now, because we're looking down at the scene, let's actually put this third vanishing point down the bottom here. Okay? Like so. What that's going to give us is, What that's going to give us is it's going to make it appear as though we're, maybe we're looking down onto some kind of scene, maybe a kind of cityscape of sorts. Now that's a little bit too close to the canvas for my liking, so I'm just going to pull it down a little bit more. It'll be a little bit harder to see, but hopefully it's visible enough for you guys who are watching. Alright, so let's zoom in a little bit here just to give ourselves a better look as to what's going on. Now as you can see, it was very, very easy to actually create these vanishing points and the perspective guidelines to go along with them. Usually this would take a fair while, and unless you had a steady hand, you'd probably have to use the line tool to get those lines 100% straight. This method saves so much time. Literally, you can do it in, a minute or less. You can simply drag it out onto the horizon line and place the vanishing points wherever you want. And heck, if you're super lazy, you can simply just clone the vanishing points that you've already created and place them like that. But let's talk about what we'd do if we wanted to kind of increase the amount of grid the amount of perspective guidelines that we have here on our canvas? Well, the way I'd go about it is I'd simply go to my first polygon tool, or my first polygon layer. Heck, let's name these to save confusion. Okay, we'll call this the X perspective grid, like so. Perspective guideline. It's only a perspective guideline, not an entire perspective grid. All right, let's go ahead and name this one. We'll call this one the Y perspective guideline, and we'll call this one the Z perspective guideline. And what we're going to do now is we're going to clone each of them to basically increase the amount of guidelines that are actually sprouting out from those vanishing points. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to take my X perspective guideline down here over to the right, and I'm just going to clone it like so. I'm going to hit Control T on my keyboard, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to basically zoom out a little bit so that I can see this side handle here, and I'm going to hover my mouse over the vicinity of this handle until it turns into this icon right here. And this is basically indicating to me that if I were to click and drag my mouse button right now, it'd allow me to rotate the basically the dimensions of this layer. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to rotate it so that those perspective guidelines are actually sitting right in the middle of the other ones, the original ones. And once I've done that, I'm just going to hit enter. And as you can see, now I've got double the amount of guidelines there for the X perspective guideline than I had before. So let's go ahead and we'll do that with the Y guidelines. Again, I'm just going to clone these like so, hit Control T on my keyboard, and I'm going to go over here and I'm simply going to rotate it so that those new guidelines are sitting smack bang in the middle of the original Y guidelines. Once I've done that, I'm simply going to hit enter again, and again, I got double the amount of guidelines there now. Now, double the amount of guidelines means I'm going to be able to basically use this grid guide to create some pretty complex stuff, and I'll have them there to guide me the entire way. Alright, finally, let's go ahead now and click on the Z perspective guidelines so that we can clone it. So I'm going to select it, drag it down to the new layer icon to clone it, and boom. It's going to create a brand new clone for us to, again, hit Control T to transform and rotate it into the middle of the original ones, like so. And once we've done that, as you can see, we've got a perspective grid guide which is twice as dense as it was before. Alright. Now, this demo is really about creating perspective grid guides, but heck, why don't we see what these grid guides can do? Why don't we put them into practice and have a look at how we might actually draw an object onto this grid guide setup? Now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to create a brand new layer group for these perspective grid guides, just to help me organize my layers palette over here to the right. So I'm going to double click and I'm going to call this new group Perspective Grid Guide. Now I like to name things so that I don't get confused later on, because I don't know about you guys out there, but my Photoshop documents can get pretty intense sometimes with the amount of layers that the document can be handling. So if I were to not actually name these correctly, I would get so lost it wouldn't be funny. Alright, now that we've grouped those together, let's we'll delete this one, we don't need it. And let's delete this one, we don't need it. Okay, so we're left with these. Let's go ahead now and we'll create a brand new layer here, and let's just draw a regular block onto this perspective grid guide. Okay, we'll call this block. And now what we'll do is we'll go ahead and we will select this. Let's select this brush here. Beautiful. And let's pick a very contrasty looking red here. Now, do you know what? I actually accidentally deleted my perspective, my vanishing point. All right. So, sorry, my horizon line. So we might not make sure that that's back there. As you can see, that's the black line right here. So remember, always remember that this horizon line here is actually the height of your eyes as you're looking onto the scene. It's the height of your head. So, just remember that. Keep it in mind. Which means everything that we draw down here, we should be able to see the top of if indeed it doesn't go above the horizon line. And anything up here, such as, maybe planes or birds, we're going to see the bottom of. Does that make sense? All right, let's go ahead and begin actually drawing out some of these blocks. Just check the brush size there. All right, it's looking pretty good. Okay, and we'll create this new layer. All right. And let's make it even thinner. Beautiful. Awesome. This is looking great. All right, so now that we've done that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to zoom in so we can see what's going on here. And I'm just going to create a few blocks actually. I'm going to create a block which is small and short, a block which is medium-sized, and a block which is tall. Okay? Have some coffee. I love my coffee. All right, let's go ahead. So let's just line them up over here. Okay? We'll make one here, here, and here. Sounds good to me. So let's start off with a short block. Okay? All right, so we'll start off. Start a block here. Like so. That's a good size. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to start at one point, and then I'm going to travel to the next point. All right. Now you'll notice that the bottom of this block, the first line I've drawn, is actually following along the trajectory of this particular guideline, which would be an X perspective guideline. So we're going to place that one there. And then what we're going to do is we're going to place another corner for our block right here. And it's going to follow the Y perspective guideline. And then, of course, I'm going to build up the rest of the block by basically creating some vertical lines that follow the Z trajectory perspective guideline. And then, as you can see, at this particular corner, there's actually not a Z perspective guideline that we can follow and accurately keep to the dimensions of this block. So we're going to have to estimate exactly what the trajectory or the angle of that line would be by basically weighing up where it would fall if there were to be a guideline here between these two. Okay, so between this one and this one. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to start here, and I know that it's going to be about as tall as this line here if I, follow along with the cursor there. And I'm just going to, let's try and, yeah, that looks about right, almost. Beautiful. Okay, so this should be almost 100% perfect. Great. Okay, so you can see we've got one guideline here, we've got one guideline here, and we've got our actual line that we've just created right there. And it fits in almost perfectly. So let's go ahead and finish up this block. Okay, I'm going to create another top edge for the block right here by following this guideline. I'm going to create another one over here. And again, we've got the same situation where we're going to have to make a little bit of an estimate here. So I'm going to create another Z perspective guide, another Z axis corner for our block here. And I'm just going to estimate it. Oh, okay. All right, so I miscalculated right there. All right, there we go, should be about here. And I'm going to join it up right there. Awesome. Now, again, a lot more of that estimation is going to have to happen here because, you know what, guys, at the end of the day, a lot of the images, hopefully, that you create will be insanely detailed and complex. And there's simply not going to be enough perspective guidelines in the world to compensate for that. So there are going to be times where you do need to kind of guesstimate where exactly you're going to have to draw your lines or the kind of dimensions of your objects. So, again, this is another situation where that's going to happen, and at this point, I'm only dealing with blocks here. So you can imagine what an entire cityscape would be like to actually have to deal with. So, it's just the way it is. Do your best to estimate, and if you mess up, the beauty about doing this digitally is that it doesn't really matter. You can simply just hit the undo button and have another crack at it. Alright, so let's finish off this block. Beautiful. Alright, so there we have it. Now, as you can see, I kind of miscalculated a little bit there, but I'm a bit of a perfectionist, so don't mind me, guys. I'm just going to fix this up. Alright, let's go ahead and try that again. Beautiful. Alright, so that's our first block that we've created. As you can see, it's sitting right below the horizon line, which means we can't see the bottom of it, but we can indeed see the top of it. Okay? Because we're looking down on it. This is where we are, up here. We're above this block, so we can see it down below. Do you get the point? Awesome. Alright, so let's go ahead and create a slightly taller block, which is slightly more forward next to this one. Okay, so again, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new block here. This one's going to be a little bit taller. Okay, so let's go ahead and we'll place it about here. Alright. So, by the way that I'm actually creating these lines, probably should have mentioned this earlier, is I'm simply clicking where I want to begin the line, and then I'm clicking again where I want to end that line. So I'm going to end it about here. Okay, actually I'm going to end it a little bit higher. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to place it about here. Right? And you can see that particular corner of the brand new block I've just created is actually following the trajectory almost exactly of the Z perspective guideline vanishing point that I created previously. Okay, so same deal as before. I'm just going to click in the place that I want to begin the line, click in the place that I want to end the line, and there should be a straight line created between the two. And of course, once I've done that, I'm going to come down here. Again, following the perspective grid guides to estimate where all of these edges and corners need to be placed, and then once one face is created, just going to join them up together. Okay, now that that's done, let's draw the rest of this block here. Okay, so I'm just going to draw out these walls, place another wall here. Now again, I'm going to place it right in the middle of these two guidelines and just estimate where exactly the Z-axis edge of this block would sit. And I'm just going to run my cursor down the bottom here and try to figure out where exactly this is going to end up. Alright, so about there. Let's put it there. Awesome. Alright, there we go. And that's almost spot on. I surprise myself sometimes. Alright, now let's finish this up, and there you go. Now, ladies and gentlemen, what I would like to point out here is the fact that this particular block both sits below the horizon line and above the horizon line, which means that we can't see either the bottom or the top. Both are obscured from our vision. Alright? Very important thing to take note of. This is where a lot of confusion happens when it comes to drawing even the most primitive shapes in perspective. Okay? Again, whatever is above the horizon line, you will not be able to see the top of, and whatever part of the object is below the horizon line, you will not be able to see the bottom of. Alright, so let's do another block, but this time let's make it so that this new block is actually up in the sky. So we'll be looking up at this object. We'll be able to see the bottom of it as if it was, again, some kind of crazy spaceship or, a dragon or something. Let's go ahead and do that now. Okay, so I'm going to create, let's place it about here. Alright. So we'll put it about here. This one's going to be a little block. Okay. Again, we're going to have to estimate exactly where this edge is going to fall on the Z axes. So we're going to place this here. And we're going to place this one here. Like so. Let's estimate this correctly first. Alright, didn't work out. Let's have another go. Didn't quite work out that time either. I guess those other estimations I made that happened the first time were just flukes, huh? Alright, there we go. That'll do. Alright, let's create the rest of this block here. Take it down there, like so. Again, we want to follow the z-axis perspective guidelines up. And we'll place this here. Alright, hang on. Let's again have another go. Alright, so it doesn't come up that far. Beautiful. Okay, now let's join them up together and create the bottom face of this object. Again, if we follow our perspective grid guide, it's going to end up about here. And again, we're going to have to make another estimation. That was just embarrassing. All right, let's have another go at that. It's a lot better. Okay, let's finish this off. And ta-da! There you have it. We have one object over here that is below the horizon line. We have another one which is, well, it's sitting in both the top and the bottom of the horizon line, and we have one above the horizon line. Okay, do you see the difference? Great. Okay, so let's talk about stacking objects on top of one another. All right, let's say that we wanted to sit another block on top of this object. Okay, how would we go about that? Well, again, we just follow the perspective grid guide that we set up in the beginning. And here's how we do it. Let's go ahead and begin building it, like so. Okay, let's build one here. And you know what? Let's build another one over here. Okay, so we could easily, again, we're going to have to do some estimation. Place one here. Whoops. Let's place one right there. Great. All right. And finally, let's place another one down here. All right. Perfect. Okay. So again, even if you are stacking objects on top of other objects, you know, in other words, when you are constructing a drawing, the entire time you're just going to be following this perspective grid guide. And that's what's so great about it, is it's going to keep everything 100% accurate for you. Now, of course, this grid guide isn't supposed to be like, you know, any hard and fast rules. Like, you don't have to strictly stick to the grid guide. It's just there to kind of help you along the way, to kind of give you a sense of 3D space on a 2D flat canvas, okay? It gives you depth. It gives you dimension. And again, look, let me illustrate this a little bit more clearly for you. Have you guys ever used 3D Max or maybe Maya, some other 3D program? You might have noticed that there's actually those three little arrows there that indicate which axes your object is on. So we have the same thing going on here. It's just that instead of letting a 3D program determine it for us, we've actually manually set up our axes here with the perspective grid guide. So let's talk about it. All right. Now again, we got our x-axis, like so. We've got our y-axis right here. Let's make that a bit darker. Okay, so we got our y-axis right here. And then finally, we've got our z-axis running up here. Okay. Like so. Now, again, let's label these so that we know what we're dealing with. All right, so Z. We've got our red x-axis over here. And finally, we've got our Y green axis over here. Okay, see that? So if we were to actually go ahead now and kind of articulate one of these blocks in the three axes and illustrate them a little bit more clearly, what you would have is you would have, by the way, the x, y, and z axes, what are they ultimately? Well, they're dimensions. Okay, so if we just had the x and y axes, we'd be dealing with two dimensions, a two-dimensional drawing. It's actually the z-axis that makes it three-dimensional. Okay, again, 1, x, 2, y, and z, three-dimensional. Hopefully that makes sense to all of you guys. Sometimes I confuse myself, so fingers crossed. All right, so let's go ahead and begin actually kind of illustrating how these three dimensions are applied to our three-dimensional block that we've drawn up here on the perspective grid guide. Again, we've got our z-axis. So if we were to color code this block here in the middle, what edges or what corners would be colored which color? All right, for example, what edges would be colored blue as the z-axis? Well, it'll probably be these ones here. Whoops. Let's pick a blue. All right, so it'll be these ones, like so. Okay. From top to bottom. And of course, if we were to color code the y-axis on this three-dimensional block, well, it'd fall about here. Okay. And of course, we've got our x-axis, which is already colored in red. So hopefully that makes a little bit of sense to you guys. And of course, hey, you know what would even make this easier and less confusing? You could color code your vanishing point perspective grid guide. All right? So you could, in theory, just simply color code your X perspective guideline as red, color code your Y perspective guideline as green, and color code your Z perspective guideline as blue. Okay? And we could easily do that now. Let's merge these shapes together, like so. And let's simply go down to our shape icon and change the color and see what we can come up with. All right, beautiful. So we'll make these red. Okay. And then we'll go ahead and we'll make the y-axis perspective guidelines green, like so. And then finally, we'll make the z-axis perspective guidelines blue, dark blue, like so. And now you can see how these guidelines, how these different dimensions actually come together to create the 3D space that we've drawn our blocks into. Well, that about finishes up our lesson for today. Hopefully you learned a thing or two. And until next time, I'll see you later.